Welcome to the Value Makers Podcast, hosted by Ryan Purvis, supported by Heather Bicknell, as we meet with people that make value happen and hear their stories. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Value Makers Podcast. You want to give us a quick introduction to yourself, please?
Yes, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm Vincent Bieri. I'm a co-founder of NextThink, one of the leading company in digital employee experience. We co-founded this company back in 2004, so a very long time ago, when at that time we never had even the thought to include the word experience or even digital or even employee as part of our value proposition or what we were doing. But for different reasons we can go through, we ended up working on that particular topic. And also, funny enough, not everybody is aware, but in 2004, when we created the company, it was also based on an AI logic system that our initial product was founded off. And again, something very early for its time, so early that we started removing a bit the AI part of the product, which sounds a bit funny when you back today, because today it's a crime not to have any AI in anything. Yeah, but yeah, that was interesting. But there were good reasons for having this, thinking that the number, the amount of data, the volume of traffic, the amount of usage of digital system will grow and was growing, let's say, exponentially. We have to remember that 2004, 5, 6, nobody had a smartphone, right? So we were very focused on people with a workplace, desktop, under the table, tower. That was the majority of computer we were monitoring back then. But changes was very rapid with a lot of adoption and a lot of digital transformation. But probably 50%, 30%, 17%, depending on the organizations and domains, were digitalized, and there were still a lot of things that were not. There was this opportunity of saying what you can manage today with some basic non-real-time tools, one day it will become impossible because you're going to have more and more usage. Like you have these niche users at this time who adopted some sort of digitalization, computers, internet, network, etc. And AI will help because human brain, normal logic of rules or thresholds you set yourself will not be able to cope with that. That was the idea. But they were aware organization that really needed it at this time because their level of, it's a dependency of those systems were not high enough. But anyway, so we founded that. And I came from a background of networking. So before that, I worked 7 years at Cisco. So I had very much this view of the network as the intelligence of the whole digital environment, because again, at this time, it could be true if you look at it from a certain perspective, because computers or devices were quite basic. They were also very standardized. It was not really, I don't want to say possible, but it was not really in anybody's idea to change the computer you were given at work to do different things, and it was not possible, however, to decide to have a different application from, I don't know, a SaaS provider, because all this was not there. So basically the endpoints where everybody had the same things, they were pretty locked down, standardized, and I would say more simple, of course, less powerful, but they were not that intelligent. It was very client server based. So clients were a little bit dumb. The server were serving one purpose. So you connect and then you run an application, and the network was here because it was also new to network most things. Originally, things were very local. And I guess if I try to remember, when I worked at Cisco, I had many, and I think we all had, right, in the end of the 90s, early 2000, local only applications. So you had a sort of local app with local data, and you just use it like that. And how many times did we lost a huge amount of work because it was only local? So there were emergence of like backup systems that were backupping because it was really critical, because the data were nowhere else but your computer. So it was a different time. And the network was also sometimes the bottleneck because people grew, let's say, the power of application, moving from like text only to images, if not videos. And suddenly the network was not able to cope with the amount of data. So knowing what's going on the network was very important. And being able to police the network for quality of service and prioritizing application was very much the trend at this time. But there were a lot of missing possibilities to monitor that. And what we came up with was really this idea to look at how applications are used from the user perspective and starting to monitor from the endpoint what nobody was doing at this time, and everybody's trying to do it from the network side. But the network is great because you have this, you can place your sensors, or whether physical hardware or software, but in a place where a lot of traffic converge.
Yeah.
And get a chance to look at many things. But when you see there a problem, you don't know how it originated. It's a little bit like if you want to monitor road traffic, you go in a central, like a heavy loaded road, you see a lot of cars and a lot of behaviors, but it's hard to go back to the root cause, for example, of why these people are here, where they come from, are they in a hurry, do they care about the jam or the construction? So we were a little bit more, okay, let's place an agent in everybody's car to have a better understanding of the drivers. And that was the idea. And that changed a lot of things, right? Because just by linking people with application and their network activity, it was suddenly revealing so many things that were so hard to actually understand, even in those simple networks, and that were not loaded as they are now, right, and used as heavily. But even then, I remember very much one of our first prospect or pilot customer, a very big company. Our product couldn't really scale at this time for them, but we had a chance to pilot with them. It was always insightful to go with them. A big food and beverages company in Switzerland, hundreds of thousands of users, employee, huge network, huge budget, a lot of tools, all what was available back then. And people with hands-on, we are always like, okay, we love what you do because we see this linkage between elements. And when they presented to their boss, CIO, or somebody more manager, they were like, look, I can see what an application does on the network and from where, and what is the executable that generated that traffic, blah, 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 and from which device, which computer. And then I remember the manager saying, yeah, but I'm a little bit puzzled because we have I think he says something like $500 million of IT budget. We have like a whole suite of Microsoft, IBM, Cisco stuff. Are you telling me we cannot know this? And the guy said, we can, but I have to take a little bit of network data there and then correlate with the IP address to know which machine there. And I need to access someone's database tool that maybe is on vacation. Anyway, he explained how the process would be and actually is. And it's okay. It takes a week sometimes to figure this out. And once I figured out, it's based on data that were from weeks ago. That was for me a complete revelation and then he said, that's why we never do it. So that's why we struggle, and there are problems that are just there because solving them requires this process. So we only do it when it's really like a really big pain that escalate. But otherwise, we don't do it. And even if we do it, sometimes it's unnecessary. It doesn't help us because it's not the right data for the right moment. So I realized here, okay, being able to do things in real time will become like game changing.
Necessity.
Yeah, and that was what we were doing here. So at that time, we called that desktop monitoring. We called that all sort of different things, but it was mainly about getting real time data about what's going on in a network. That was really what we've been doing in the early days. And yeah, and then customers started to show us a little bit the way, because they we were lucky enough to have first set of customers, and then we spent a lot of time with them. We spent a lot of time looking at first how the product really worked or not, and because we knew we had to do a lot of adaptation and enhancement for scalability, but not only, also like enterprise class, like integration and things like that, but also discovering. But this was not for me. I was much more going there to say, okay, every entrepreneur in the tech startup, you're too much focused on your product. But then I realized, okay, it's also interesting to talk with customers about what are the other projects they have, problems, and then realize, oh, our tool might help here or there, and connect the dots like that. And also realizing, oh, there is a guy there using the product to do something you were not even thinking about it. They started to say, hey, we use it for this and that. And that shaped up also the future of how we look at using all this data, and eventually ended up to say, yeah, but this is really well suited to support IT organization to not just monitor how good their systems, their routers or their servers or their application are, but how satisfied their users, their employees are with all this, not existing system for sure, but also throughout the different changes and transformation they go through. Yeah. And that had been not anticipated, I have to say. Today we could made a story like, hey, we invented this first day, but that's not the way it worked. And because when we started, we did it was not like according to the book, like how to do a startup or how to be an entrepreneur, like find a problem, solve it, blah, blah. It was not like that. It was, I met Pedro, Patrick at a university lab, more or less, with a prototype of a technology, like a capability, it was this real-time data coming like this and saying, okay, it shows stuff. I was like, wow, I've never seen it this way. And I'm not a programmer or such, but I have an engineering background, but I've more worked in like sales engineer and then product marketing and things like that. More with the field or with the product people or sales as well. But not building the product per se. But I realized, okay, this could fit many purposes. And so we set up the company, we worked full gas on that. And one thing that fitted very well at this time was, or we thought so, was like, yeah, but if we can look at this so well, it's going to help people to secure their network better, because real-time serves security before anything else, at least back then, because security is usually, at least when you talk about reactivity, you have to know things as soon as they happen. And it's a little bit like health. If you detect a problem in your body soon, then later it's going to be easier to cure, fix, etc. So before it propagates or get worse. So that was very compelling to say. And the second thing, besides real time, was this user perspective, because I would say the only time people talked about the human, and they were calling it like that, and there were books about it, like Human Factor. Yeah, it was about cybersecurity, cybercrime, and threats and things like that, and risk. It was not about performance. So it was really about the weakest link is the people. Either they do mistakes or errors or on purpose attacks or whatever, but it's because we let people touch the system that sometimes it's screwed up. So we said, okay, we have two things that are nice. It's real-time data. Therefore, you can there is no chance to be proactive without real time, I would say. So you could even prevent sometimes or see it coming. And if it's there, you can see it very quickly. It's a little bit like an X-ray or some sort of things for your body. So you can pick it up before it shows too many symptoms.
Yeah.
And second, we look at it from the perspective of what the user are actually doing on their computer, which is what everybody complains in cybersecurity. We don't understand, we cannot see that, right? We only know the rebound of what is actually what people click on or type or and so on. And that was making a lot of sense. And it was working, I would say. And today, most cybersecurity and so on is based on studying this. Huh? And the reason we pivoted more to employee experience, even if at first we didn't call it like that, it was in fact because our customers started to do both. Like we sold for security, and then I realized, okay, they are using it to do more, let's call it IT management.
There's a natural relationship there, because if you want a secure environment, you take away certain things from a user, which ruins user experience or decreases their performance. So
Yeah,
you constantly balance
correct.
that seesaw.
So today this is very clear, but back then wasn't really. At the moment, it's always hard to realize what's going on. But yes, so that was happening, and then then it was getting harder and harder to do everything well, because security became a bigger thing and there were a lot of players. There were, I would say, more competition for sure. And there were things we were not at all involved with. And back then, people on an endpoint, they wanted an antivirus or what was called like a personal firewall, whatever was there. Without that, it was hard to battle on. I think the market was called endpoint security at this time. And yeah, we had this cool stuff, but not the whole thing. Battling with, so of course we could say, okay, you need your Symantec, McAfee type of product plus us. But that was okay for early adopter, but it became harder and harder. And also, overall market was at that time was in terms of security, people were not so advanced. So we had a lot of prospective clients saying, what you do is great, but let me first install a firewall before I care about the human factor, just to make it simple. And then we said, okay, in IT service management and things like that, this is more mature, and we can go with more simple things like performance of an application or helping people to drive change without solving things and not adding problems and things like that. And, at some point we really decided to focus more on the IT service management than anything else. Of course, there was always a component. I think we stopped saying security, but more like compliance, because there is also a sense of, okay, having the right things that you think you have, because every time you monitor something with a tool, you have to do some sort of, you get some sort of inventory of what's there, because, you're going to discover one way or another. And that was also helping, and it was fitting well together. And then we started really realizing this message of you have to focus on people less than your servers or your systems was resonating very well. I think we called it something like user-centric IT or something like that first. And then we had this idea of, to include experience, because at the end of the day, it was experience for me it has nothing to do with the tool. Experience has to do with the outcome. And because it's what is then challenging, and what was, I think it's still today, is how do you measure an experience? Because if you go to a restaurant, you go there, you order, you eat, you drink, you pay, you go, right?
Yeah.
And you always have an experience, which is a feeling for yourself, and also something you share with people who were with you.
So then,
Days later, oh, have you been to this place? Yes. Oh, do you like it? So that's what I call experience. Now, if you say, okay, if you want to measure it without being in this conversation, because it doesn't scale really, is I didn't finish my plate. You could measure that. And then you could say, okay, if you want to measure it, what do you like? Is I didn't finish my plate. Because it doesn't scale really, is I didn't finish my plate. You could measure that. But does it mean it's not good? Was too much food? What does it mean? It's hard.
Yeah.
And with employee experience, using tech systems monitoring, which we were doing, it's not so obvious, right? So it's easy to measure, I don't know, load time, latency, jitter, whatever, right? For an application. But if this metric is increasing, does it mean anything regarding the experience? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And that was to me, the harder thing. I remember this case, a print error or problems with the driver. Okay, all this we could detect it one way or another. And then you say, print error or too much time to print a document. Because sometimes with delay, with buffer, you can measure, sometimes takes 30 seconds, and for you, suddenly it takes 10 minutes. So that's a bad experience. It depends, because sometimes people in the office, they print something, and then they even forget they printed it, and it's there for ages at the printer, right? And it goes to the trash, or they do something else, and 1 hour later, they go pick up the papers. So if it took so much, do you have to worry? Not worry. If you print it, because in 2 minutes, I have this client's meeting and I want the contract in paper because I think it's a good idea and I want it and it's the way to close the deal. And if it's not there, the experience is really bad and it has potential business consequences. So all this is hard to know from a metric you can measure or see. It's like the restaurant example, right? And then you realize also two things. The restaurant is a good idea, a good analogy, because I think we can all relate to that. We've all heard about this great place from people, and then we go and we don't like it. And then is it because we have different way to look at what's expected, what is good, what is bad, what is positive, negative, or were you there a bad time when something happened that wasn't there the other day? So again, very hard to do, because even in IT is the same thing. Let's take video conferencing systems, right? Some people say, I love this one, I don't like this one. And you have all sort of opinions. So that's not an easy thing to quantify and qualify.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you've said there. Obviously, one of the biggest problems in the enterprise is observability in a central place, because you have all these different tools of different complexities. And if I remember my banking days, we had connectivity in some places that was probably worse than a dial-up, versus other places we had like a 10 gigabit link. And it's just, how do you monitor and measure that environment and then proactively heal any issues? What was your experience with customers and the process of, I don't want to say educating them to be but obviously they didn't understand what your value proposition was to some extent. How did you go through that process of getting them to understand what you were bringing to them from a value perspective?
I think we did what everyone coming with an innovation are doing. It's two things. First of all, it's you work yourself a little bit in vacuum. Okay, how could I, what you build something and you go out and you usually fail big time. So people, they don't understand, but they are stupid. It's more what you say is not digestible for them, right? Or it doesn't really resonate, or because usually, and the reason is usually because, as I said before, you're focused on your own bubble or your own boundaries, which are not the ones of the one you talk to. Although, so you have to find this intersection where you as a product maker, you have a part of what you do and say, it's a little bit what's below the iceberg under the water, right? That the customer doesn't care too much. Or when they start caring, it's because they are convinced that what they see above the water surface is actually for them. Not for them in sense of the value, but just, I fit in what you're telling me. I see I'm the right person for this topic you're talking about. And second, now when I see a value or I see something in it that I could make good use of myself, for my team, for my company, for whatever. And usually because what we master is what's below, because that's our daily life. Our daily life is to think about how to implement a feature, it's really tech innovation, product centric, or process or pain or so. And then we try to re-explain how hard we worked on something, but okay, but that's not, if and if you visit the bank, it explain you how hard they work on this new portfolio asset management. You're like, okay, but
Yes.
instantly you feel out of the interest. So yeah, that was a learning, because once you know that, of course, if you have to redo it, you think it differently. But for us, was a little bit our first time. So yes, so you go with things, and then also what I've learned is, no matter what you do and how good you do it, there are just a few organization people. I put them all because it's sometimes a bit of mix, but who are genuine early adopter and will move forward with you. So it's also, you have to find these people. There is no, let's say, directory for that. So there is no other choice than you go with the people you know already. From there you go, and you have to, suddenly you get to these people who fall in love with that and have this genuine inspiration for taking risk. And also they like to try new stuff. And some others, it's not they don't understand, but they're just not the first mover. And I think that's the way it is. So that's why when you have a couple of those initial potential clients, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build a huge, I don't know, marketing machine, because it's not going to make a difference. You have to first go with them, validate, extract the value, and then from there you build the next wave of communication messages based on this, with references for the next level of a little bit less early adopter, and then you redo it again, and then you reach this more mass market, let's say. Yeah, it's a little bit schematic, but that's what I've seen. So yes, you have to work, but you should also not expect that if not everybody says, oh, amazing, I need it, it's not only because your value proposition, your messages, your whatever is bad. And it's also because there are many people who they're not attracted to fancy new stuff. They're attracted by maybe curiosity or just intellectually, but it's not going to go if they have time. And I realize that in some organization, there are a lot of people who have not too much to do, and for them, it's an opportunity to fill a little bit their days and their agenda. So you have to, and that's why now I always recommend to ask the question: did you ever bought a solution from a startup or from something very new? Because if the people you talk to tell you no, you have to say, why would I be the first one? Maybe there is a good reason, but otherwise, it's not going to happen. If they only buy from leading vendor, established player, if you do financial audit and you have your own little firm and you go to companies who've worked only with the big four, I think you can present them whatever value you're maybe better than what they get from them, but they're not going to change because the risk to do it is way bigger than the status quo. And actually, to motivate innovation to go through an organization, it's much more about the risk of the status quo getting bigger than trying something else, rather than this something else having so much value that I just can't miss it.
Yeah.
It's usually the opposite. Because anyway, the value you explain is very theoretical because you haven't experienced it 100 times in the field with real customers. So you can only say, yeah, if you would do this, it would be better, cheaper, faster, blah, blah, blah. But okay, who has done it? You would be the first. So yeah, maybe it works, maybe not. And there is always a price to pay to go with something new that we underestimate. So I understand it's why companies are not always, they're curious, but not forward.
Well, in one of our previous conversations, I think you mentioned something which I thought was quite profound, is that you guys didn't do POCs, you did proof of value.
Correct. So that's true. So the idea was, what worked, let's say, because we tried many different things, but what worked very well was to say, okay, we have a software that can see your environment in a different way from the user perspective, what they experience, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this can mean more proactivity, more this, less that, all clear. The problem is, because for me, there are two ways, right? Or two type of solutions. The ones who replace something existing.
Yep.
If it would be pure network monitoring, you say, okay, we replace your Cisco, whatever, and it's better. And there is an owner of that, somebody who has a process. So you just swap with something fresher, more new, and basically they have the team, they have everything. Or you have a proposal that we say, we invented something new that you don't do today. And in that case, the big problem is that there is a gap between what the product does in a demo or theoretically, and to the moment it does that at the customer site. You need to implement, you need to train people, you need to find time, you need to move teams around. And for this, some people don't want to say, hey, you were monitoring SAP, now you monitor end user employee experience. They're like, maybe they don't want, so you have to anyway. So there are a lot of hurdles to get there. So what is the problem? You present the guy, say, oh, that's great. Now they say, how do I get there in my environment? Not on the screen. That's clear, right? So to have my data of my network live in this visualization I see in your demo, it's not just overnight. Maybe you can say, oh, it's plug and play, it's a cloud, whatever, SaaS. Overnight, it's up and running, yes, but until it's operationalized, it's never overnight. It's always a bit of a challenge. So what we decided to do was to say, okay, we're not going to get there because we're just talking. So we're going to say, okay, do you care about we build this somehow maturity model for employee experience. Level 0 was, I don't care, which is basically, it was a bit provocative. You don't care, so you don't do anything, fine. So you don't need us and you don't need any other tool. Level 1 was, we changed name 20 times, but maybe something very reactive, just to say, you don't have to have all this full proactive, complex stuff. It's going to help you tactically. When there is a problem you cannot fix, otherwise, boom, it can help you speed up this and figure out things. For that, you don't need too much, etc. And then we have this mature, and then the end level was like a business-centric, whatever. And okay, where are you now with what you have, etc. So we can assess your environment, how many problems you have, how many time is lost, how many applications are badly configured or used or adopted, how many get deployed that nobody uses or risky, and so on.
Yeah.
Where are the opportunities to improve? The biggest one versus, because they're not always where you think. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so we sell like an assessment, so it's like a service, and that was the proof of value. But it was not like something the customer does themselves, which was very different because they don't have the guy, because it's not like you replace something. If I replace a desk endpoint asset management, the guy has Microsoft System Center, I sell my tool. The owner of that, he tries the new one, he says, I like it, I want it, blah, blah, blah. Here, nobody, right, is here to take that. So we say, okay, we do it ourselves. Just leave us access to, so we can install and deploy. Somebody helps us a little bit, but it was very minimum investment. And then we deliver a sort of result, report, presentation. That's what, for a very long time, in the not early days, because there, again, you can come with that. If you don't have any prospect yet, you need to find this early adopter. They don't care about these things. They just say, oh, that's new, I love it, I want to try it. But the next wave, we get maybe the next, let's say, 100 customers. Let's say the first 10 were like highly early adopter, and then 100 of People were like, yeah, innovators, let's call it like that. And they all moved through this, we called it NBS, next thing, baseline service. I think that was the name, like proof of value. And then every time we hired something new in like sales management or customer implementation, they changed the name, but at the end it stayed the same. The idea was really to show them the potential of having this information about what is going on for every employee over a month or two, and then realizing, as I said before, the risk to not do anything is getting bigger than addressing these things. Because 100%. You leave a lot of money on the table by letting, I remember discovering crazy stuff, like people with like computers, every time they were like 8 hours working on the computer with 100% CPU, 100% memory overload. So the thing was slow as hell, but it was like this for ages. So they probably never got really help from the service desk, and they abandoned and they just work like this. I don't know if they were even frustrated, but at least they were not highly efficient. And you say, okay, you have a lot of things you can fix, and it's really getting important to address that.
Yeah, I remember going to visit one of our offices and got there for 9 o'clock and met the guys I was meeting with, and they all turned their computers on. They went and grabbed coffee, went outside for an hour. And I said, why were you out here for an hour? No, we're waiting for the machines to boot up.
Yes.
What do you mean? What do you mean waiting? He said, no, it takes about 45 minutes for the machines to boot. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. So yes, but maybe just, to shortcut a little bit, because I think in this, let's say, all this was a little bit history, let's put it this way. Yeah. Now, for me nowadays, of course, there is still a lot to do in fixing technical issues and things like that. But for me, it's more like a done deal somehow, at least from an innovation. And now you see there are different vendors offering like this sort of monitoring, knowing who has a long boot time or an application that is too slow or too many crashes or whatever. I think that's, for me, that's a done deal. Of course, it's not implemented everywhere. There is still a lot of work to do, but we know what to do and it's going to happen. So I would say even like this idea of zero ticket, no more service desk. For me, if you want to do it and you put the effort for that, I think you can achieve it with what's available. For me, the next big thing is really this idea of how, because for me, it's zero problem from a technical perspective doesn't necessarily equal top experience in terms of employee experience, right?
Yeah.
Because you can slice digital in between. This is just to say, okay, today that's the way it is. It's to say, but because we do IT stuff, if I remove the digital, it's very misleading and people start to think you are like working on well-being of employee or so on. And then, but digital, but still people start to say, okay, but if I don't have the right digital workplace helping me to get my job done, I can also get burned out, blah, 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 whatever. So there is a sort of intersection, right, happening. And I think there is an opportunity and a big risk, right? The big risk is to start doing things that are not relevant, monitoring, did you finish the plate, and making, how to say, not decision, but transforming that metric into saying, it was too much food. It wasn't, I just
An insight,
maybe I didn't like something, or I don't know, had to leave for a phone call, and it could be 20 different reasons. And the risk, because when you stay tech, IT, service, and so on, if you say the application is slower than yesterday, you're right. Now you want to address it or not, something else. But saying, therefore, somebody now has a bigger chance to, I don't know, deliver a bad job. That's a shortcut that you have to be very careful to make, because if you get it right 50% of the time, forget it. Nobody will trust your product anymore.
Yeah.
But there is an opportunity, because I think besides the IT and service desk and all this, people are having mental health and issues, burnout, stress. This is a reality of today's work environment. And there are a lot of initiatives to help people on their well-being, et cetera, et cetera. So now the question is, which is called employee experience, by the way, by HR or whoever is in charge. So is a digital employee experience software fitting in this or not, and how? That I think is interesting to explore and see if there is something to do or not, and what. And I think the future is more there than in being a little bit better in fixing IT issues, because I think there are enough players, enough solutions. It's just tweaking things now, more automation, using more AI, whatever. But that's not like it can be a huge deal in terms of market volume, millions of dollars, etc. You can sell of stuff, but not necessarily of breakthrough in terms of innovation. And I think all the next steps of like experience you can better measure or refine, they're not within the tech metrics, because they're all related to the example I said, to what's the exact context at that time. So it's about context and persona, right? Am I on an onboarding phase, or am I about to leave the company, or am I managing a crisis or a daily business? Is it quarter end? Does it matter to me more than the beginning of a quarter? Am I on PTO? Did I just had a role change or a promotion? Things like that, I think, matters to things we measure. And then to make, and you cannot monitor that from I don't know, an IT agent running on a desktop, laptop, or the network, or a server, or browser plugin. You cannot know that.
It's interesting you say that, because there's definitely been a convergence, and I chat to various people in this, between the HR function and the IT function, in the sense that I think COVID to some extent drove this a lot harder, because you had to move people that were now, in a lot of cases, going to an office to be working remotely, and you need to have the right tools for the right jobs. It centered on, do you have the ability to perform with your tools? But also all those things you mentioned, and I love some of those examples, because the joiner, mover, leaver process, to bring somebody in, to move them in the roles, and for them to leave, there's a lot of technology involved in that process, and a lot of businesses don't automate that process. It's very hand cranky manual, but actually it ties very much into the experience of an employee. And there was actually a stat somewhere that I remember reading, that 80% of employees leave in the first year if their onboarding was bad.
Yeah.
And
And I guess also, I can trust that. And if they don't leave, if you have a bad onboarding, it's very hard to be very productive.
motivated. Yeah.
And motivated. And it's a circle. I was always saying, we have to give goals to people that 80% of people should attain their goals. Because if they don't, the question is not, are they good or bad? Or did we make the right choices on hiring? It's more, they're going to get demotivated for sure, not just because of bonuses and money, but just by the feeling of, hey, I'm failing to do what we committed to accomplish. It's never good overall. So true, you have to help people onboarding so that they have the right knowledge, tools, and everything. They know what they have to know. And they have goals that are attainable with a standard work engagement. And because it's not linear, even a day or half a day is not linear. You have different things going on. Some you control, most you don't.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
So and they are the worst, because interruption, problems, whatever they are, human driven, tech driven, external market driven, they stress you. Okay. And how people handle that is very individual. And what I think we move from heavily, right? I was saying when we started NextThink, we came from an environment of standardization, right? And most people were using Nexting to make sure every computer looked the same, is installed the same, is used the same, is configured.
Yeah.
Right. Now, nobody search for that because it's impossible. And B, it would be like people would just leave right away. If suddenly your computer gets locked down back to a sort of standard configuration, you would say just, hey, what? They would even feel you're you're interfering with their privacy, personal life. So we are in a world of personalization, not just settings, but also the way to do things. When I was onboarded at Cisco in 1997, they were telling me even when to answer emails. So, you come in the morning, you open your stuff, you reply to your emails, and then something like that, right? There was a lot of process for everything to tell you how to do the stuff.
Yeah.
To do this, you use this tool. To do that, you do this way, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's not like that. If I feel I'm more powerful using Excel for something rather than whatever, people do it. And if you refrain them from doing this, I think you generate a sense of
Resistance.
that you don't trust them also.
Yeah.
Empowerment is trust as well, and trust is key in every human relationship. So yeah, and now, so the experience is also related to this. How do you, and can you measure all this? It's not so easy because some people, they want more guidance. They want more, they still want more. Tell me how to do this the best way. So it's not by measuring like how many personal tools you have. That means this is great. No, sometimes can mean, oh, for some people, it's not a good thing, right? So it's all hard to do. And that's why things that all vendors are doing now, one way or another. But very soon with Nexting, we realized, because we tried things like you build this experience index, scores, or you name it, but you realize if you base those solely on measurable technical metrics, you have a lot of time you're outside the reality perceived by human beings.
Yeah.
So we realize we have to get human sentiment, human feedback into the game. So we were the first to release this contextual human feedback, people feedback, to actually include what people feel, think, or have to say about something into the overall scoring. But I think that needs to go further with not necessarily a feedback you give yourself, but I know a company, they measure like, they can figure it out by analyzing voice conversation, the voice files.
Yeah.
If you're stressed or relaxed or about to collapse, burnout, have a or a well-being level, and then same thing. So it's technical, but it's based on something. So now you have to prove it's really representing reality, like a psychologist would assess. I've seen scientific papers showing this is really possible to do. So let's assume it is. The question then is, what do you do with that? Because do you call the people and say, hey, go see your doctor? Or I don't know, but I've seen stuff like, because my experience probably I think the worst experience you have at work is not the application is not working like you want. It is, I have too much stuff to do, not enough time, things like that.
Yeah.
So should the system analyze your calendar and realize you don't have enough free time, or you have too many meetings, or too many calls from your boss, or that's also an experience and it influences. And technology tools are used to create that stress or relief from stress somehow, because I know some people, I've seen that they book fake meetings to give them some space right in the day, but you could automate that based on, we did it already 10, 15 years ago to automate like PC refresh based on hardware, software states to say, hey, your PC is suffering too much. You need a more powerful one. you need, or for this person, they have way too much powerful computer for, they just read PDFs. So you could do the same with how people use their time and what they do with it.
Yeah.
To give them a better experience, a better sense of purpose at work.
Yeah, there's a few things about that. We did a lot of work around, because we had the data, looking at people's roles and their skills and where they were spending their time. So if you had a developer who should be writing code, but they're spending 6 hours a day in Outlook or Skype for Business in those days or Teams today, you'd be asking the question, why are you spending so much time in collaborative tools, Outlook or Teams, as opposed to writing code that you should be writing? And you'd find out that actually that team doesn't have a project manager or a product manager, and there's a gap there. So this person has taken the leadership to fulfill that role, but they're actually not delivering the throughput on the thing that they were actually hired to do. And so you can have a much more mature conversation in some respects. And I think, you know, what you said there around managing the qualitative and the quantitative data, you can have the technical data that's quantitative, with the person's perception, which is qualitative, because often we would look at the data and say, oh, the machine's running really well. And you go talk to the user and the user goes, no, it's terrible. I'm having a rough time, et cetera, et cetera. And you need that perception to be managed, because often.
Yes, correct. But it goes further than that, because with the same level of quantitative metrics, like performance of the app, one day I can say, oh, it's fine for me. Another day, because I get a phone call telling me bad news, I would be even more harsh on the performance, because where I stand mentally at that moment. That's why even the user feedback sometimes is hard to relate to a technical quantitative metric. You know what I mean? We all experience that. And probably Monday morning is not the same as Friday afternoons. It's the same thing. The week start, I'm not very energized. The weekend is about to come. I forgive maybe more things because my goal is to go home, right? And again, that's not necessarily, or I would say never taken into account, at least not today. So from the problem, when we go this route, right, already when we go only the very basic technical metric, those things already appeared or appear also today. But with this, it would be even more, but it's all the privacy and things like that, because even if you do nice outcome, or it's positive outcome that you look for, I can start thinking, yeah, if you want to integrate my stress level, I don't know, you could have a smart watch. They'd say, and you could input that. Why not? I think technically, and it could make a lot of sense, potentially, but because that's an experience of the user, or maybe the way I type, stressly or calmly, maybe. But is that good to do? Because would people use this maybe for knowing who should be maybe out of the company sooner than we thought? Or there is also a lot of risk with that, because at Nextthink, when we started, we never had this idea of, hey, we're going to build something to spy on users, and Big Brother is watching you so that the manager can know if you're doing gaming or things like that. Honestly, even didn't think about it, but I've seen it being done at some customers. Sure. So, and then you're like, shit, that was not the idea, but some people do that. Of course, we had this anonymization, and we have, I'm sure it's still there, anonymization, blah, blah, blah. But when you do anonymization in the tool, you have to be able to do, because if it's only anonymous and nothing else, and people say, but I want to help this user with a random pseudocode XY10168. They have a virus on their machine, but I cannot know who they are, what the machine is, what the points, right? So I want to help them. So you have to have a way to, maybe for some users with a certain process. So that was the way we implemented it, to raise the anonymity and things like that. But as soon as you can do that, it's up to the company to implement this. Either it's a free bar, open bar. Everybody can see who is what and so on. And then it also opens up threads to individuals, company, and it's all about culture, right? So I think employee experience by essence is a positive thing.
Yeah.
And company builds from HR, IT, both, or I think it's more a transversal thing. It's not just HR, but it's a culture, right? It's a positive thing, but you have to also manage what the negative side could be and make sure it's not going this way. But it's there, and it's important to because I have two ways to react on something like somebody is too stressed to cope with the demand, they don't use the latest, greatest application we provide because I don't know, they don't get it or they haven't been trained enough. I don't know. So you have two ways to react. Either you help them, you train them on this new application, AI, whatever,
Yeah.
for accelerating adoption for most of the people. But we could also say, okay, they don't do it. I fire them. I hire somebody who does it. If they get stressed, close to burnout, whatever the way we measure it, they have a bad experience. They are not engaged. They are demotivated. We have one way you say, I give you 3 days for a little bit of a spa or a little bit of relaxing time so you come fresh. Or again, I can also say, you're not made for the job and I take something from outside who's going to be at least more energized. I don't know. So it's very important to know why you do this and how you're going to react and you have to decide in advance because if you do it again without thinking beforehand, you would probably take the wrong decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting, a couple of things you said there. So the thing that I found is that the average user nowadays is far more sophisticated than they were 10, 15 years ago because the consideration of IT, the sort of Apple experience, if you like. I buy a laptop, I buy an iPad, I buy an iPhone. It all integrates together, it all works together. Why can't I have that when I go into my enterprise?
Yeah.
And the freedom that I have in that experience. The other thing, so one of the things we did was we had a portal that took the technical score, but we also put a behavioral score on that. And we said that if you remove the apps you don't use, you increase your score. If you reboot your machine on a regular basis, you increase your score. So we gave them all the good behaviors because being on a VDI infrastructure where you're sharing compute, users had to know that what they did as bad behaviors would affect each other. So to keep the performance high, we made them part of the solution. Instead of it being IT must fix this, it was, how do I fix this myself? And there you have those situations with self-help and running fixes themselves and all that kind of stuff. We did a bit with semantic search, semantic detection to detect how users were feeling. But I'll be honest, that was probably 50-50 correct.
Yeah,
Anything.
It's a hard thing, but I think there is an opportunity for the future to work on, really on the employee experience overall and combine more things than we do today all together to create something that is more transversal to an organization than vertical. Because now IT is vertical, HR is a vertical, and so on. And you can, I feel that the mistake is to say, okay, employee experience is IT plus HR. And I think that's not true because, it's not going to work because it's two different silos. And then if I'm in finance, I would say, but it's also concerning me because when people ask for budget or they don't get the budget, the pay, whatever, then they are frustrated. So I'm also there. And then the sales or the business or the product, they make a case for employees, people who are fresh, they are more creative, so they have better ideas for new products and customer experience, etc. People at the customer center support, same thing. So for me, it's either in IT, it's a technical service desk thing, fine, like what it is today, or you go transversal, like, it's like cybersecurity. If you don't do it, if it stays in IT and IT only, that doesn't work. We all know that. So it has to be a transversal thing, let's say top down, supported by the manager, the executive, the board, and so on. And I think that's the only way to go beyond what's available today. is to do it this way. And that's a hard thing to do because very few things made it. If you look at cybersecurity, I think 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I remember at Cisco, so it's 30 years ago, it was already, the message was IT security shouldn't be an afterthought of technician and blah, blah, blah. It should be the executive, the board, it's a business because the risk, but nothing moved for decades. It moved because it became much more impactful, but also of regulations, right? But because when you start to say, okay, in this domain, finance, in this country or Europe, breaches have to be declared publicly to the financial blah, blah, blah institution. Suddenly people cannot just say, oh, dear IT engineer, just do that. It has to be signed off by the board, the president, whatever. So it changed for these reasons. And then it worked a little bit better. Of course, there are more attacks, more things, but at least the awareness is now completely transversal. I think employee experience is the same thing. It must become a transversal thing because it is, I always said, even in quotes, small, it's a small company, although you can say it's a successful startup. But next thing, number one asset has always been its people, right? You remove the people, the product is worth nothing, right? So you need the people, and the people needs to be engaged, involved, creative, reactive, agile. You need to drive a lot of things, and in every single department. And everybody is a little bit interconnected, not one individual with every department, but there is never more than 3 layers separation between anyone, for sure. So that, and then because we were in a fast growth space in like 2015, 20, we hired a lot of people. So to hire a lot of people, like 100, 150 a year, you cannot have a bunch of people not happy because that will be perceived outside. People don't want to join. So you need this magnet, and this magnet is the user experience. Everybody speaks positively about this company. You should join it if you can. It's great. That creates a huge advantage to hire the best people you can. It's because the employee experience overall, not just with a computer and a keyboard, is great. And I think we have to move a lot this way because it gives a lot of advantages to those who do it really well.
Culture is important, and I think if you got the right culture, it does create momentum.
Now we could argue, is employee experience monitoring or tools or management a way to measure the culture adoption, the culture behavior in the action? Because people confuse sometimes culture with writing a few great words on board, or what you actually do and how you interact with each other internally, but also externally. I haven't thought about it, but because you just said this, I'm thinking like we are not far from building a sort of culture management system, because probably the most representative of the culture is actually the employee experience, not just by what they feel, but what they do and how they do it. I have an information. Do I share it with people who could benefit from it? That's for me a culture behavior. In some enterprise, people keep it and hoping this other person there will fail and not giving the information. So that's very true, right? It could happen. I've seen it happen. So do you build a culture where as soon as I have an information, I say, oh, it could benefit this person. Let's right away communicate that and even collaborate in how we can move the needle forward in a positive way together. And for me, that's an employee experience way of looking at, are you on the culture words in your attitude? And does it last? Does it improve? Because usually these things go, it's like people who want to lose weight. They don't eat anything but drink water a day and then back to the bad habits, right? Because they say, nothing happened this morning. I weighed more than yesterday. So it's not the right thing to do. things takes a long time, right? An employee experience is a long-term journey. That's also what was hard, I think, for us it was because if you do like application issue performance monitoring, you monitor it out, that's slow, boom, fix it. That's a short-term, easy reward. But then we realized the impact is usually not big in terms of, okay, you have a little bit of a faster computer, but are you really making a difference? Bottom line of the organization. And the answer is very often no.
Yeah.
But if you say, I'm going to build a totally proactive IT system where you're not going to need a service desk at all. Here you say, okay, the service desk today costs 5 million a year altogether, outsource, insource, whatever. If you get rid of it, that's a cost you can withdraw. But you cannot do that overnight, of course. It's going to take many years. So you have to embark on a long, difficult, but you have to establish regular habits and changes over time.
Yeah.
And then you radically change the experience and radically change the culture as well. It's a culture not to rely on a help desk or to call a help desk that cannot help. That's a radically different thing. But and motivating somebody to embark on such a long-term journey, it's always harder than short, quick wins.
Yeah. I don't think you'll ever get away from a service desk. You might get rid of the sort of level 0 or level 1 with automation. But I think as you move it more and more towards the right, you'll get more and more sophisticated people to support you as you move.
I agree. I'm not organized. When I say get rid of it, it's a goal you shoot for.
Yeah.
You maybe never get there, but it's to give we had a internally at NextSync, we were measuring customer satisfaction, success, whatever the name, because we had sometimes the first time we lost, like somebody didn't renew. It was a complete surprise. Gosh. And I was like, this is weird. I thought they loved the product, which they did. At least the guy using it. But for reasons that escaped our vigilance, they didn't renew. And it's, okay, what? So that shouldn't happen, right? So it happened because we were not watching carefully what was going on inside existing customers. So we established a way to look at, it was like customer engagement experience, somehow monitoring. So we had different process for different customers, and then we had ratings that were green, orange, or red. The goal was 0 red, right?
Yeah.
But we never had 0 red, but we were working for 0 red. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So for me, no help desk needed doesn't mean you don't have one. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. But for some employee, maybe it's the reality. That's a big difference. For some of you, you will work here, never have to call any support, IT service, whatever. Some of you will experience that. That's a big change from assuming you have problems. So this is the number you call, or the way, the process, the tickets. You almost need a training to know how to open one, because we know in advance you're going to need one every other week.
Yeah.
And we move to, most of you won't need it. Some will need it. So first of all, you have a completely different process. You have a completely different approach to what you offer to employee. It's a little bit like if I'm your doctor and I say, Ryan, more you age, more harder life will be, and you're going to need me more and more drugs and more treatment. That's the approach of today's service desk. If I tell you, we establish a game plan together with a routine and some habits that's going to make you probably not even need any doctor for another 2 or 3 decades. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean nobody needs a doctor. That's not what I say. And I think it's a little bit like that. I think we can achieve it today. And that's a big change, isn't it?
It is. So my experience being in the IT side was that we weren't allowed to say, call the help desk. We could only do text, because a call to the help desk cost more than a text to the help desk. And in fact, we weren't even allowed to use the help desk in theory, because we should have been able to sort the problem out ourselves. So I could definitely see that happening. It's the same as we weren't allowed to print. And if we did print, it had to be black and white, not color, because obviously color is more expensive. So there's definitely those different types of users in the environment. And one of the reasons why we went down the persistent VDI route, not persistent VDI route, was the automation benefits of doing that, having a golden image that you clone, improve the build, and then run fixes proactively. So we didn't have to have tickets. We avoided tickets, but we kept score of how many we avoided.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think we can move from a help desk to something that is, let's say, more, I don't know, let's call it a coach desk, or I don't know, because it's
A genius bar.
yes, exactly. I know so much about you that even before you call, I tell you things you should do, learn, or change.
Yeah.
It's much more a coach or a trainer or something like that. Because help sounds, today's help desk is a desperate call or text you said. And
Yeah.
and it's okay. And yeah, I think there is, with digital employee experience tools used in a proper way, you can also shift from, of course, less support tickets to none, and for the rest to move to something that is much more a coach trainer approach, way more proactive, way more, yeah, like your coach, your fitness coach. He's not here, he's not absent. And when you really, I don't know, fall apart, they come and like start to ask you stupid questions, things that are so obvious. Or, I mean, it's even frustrating sometimes to get help because the way it's handled. Yeah. So that's true, no? And so I think we can change that as well. I agree. Yeah.
So one of the things that we did is we would give the user a list of options to fix themselves. Then they'd have knowledge base articles, and then they could talk to a person. If they bypassed the first two options and went straight to a person, they would go in a long queue. But if they did the things we asked them to do, and that still didn't work, then they'd get the white glove service. So they would go straight to level 3 as opposed to a level 1. And what we found with that is that people realized that they would be far more efficient if they tried it themselves than if they went straight to the help desk. And then when they'd used whatever knowledge base article or whatever fix we ran, they'd get a quick survey. Did this work? Did not work, etc. And if it didn't work, we'd feed that into engineering to build a better solution for them. Because we had all the telemetry, we had all the data. We just didn't know necessarily all the edge cases.
Yeah. But I don't know if the punishment is, because it's a little bit like the Tesla autopilot. Now they usually have to steer, otherwise it disengaged.
Yeah.
If it disengaged more than X amount of time, you don't have autopilot for the next 2 weeks or something like that.
I didn't know about that. Okay.
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah.
Punishment, of course, short term, I think it helps to control the behavior. So they go through knowledge base, like the example of the self-driving mode, because the fear of the punishment, of the long queue or the absence of autopilot for a while. But I'm always, usually I'm like, wow, can we do something else that is more positively engaging than fear of the punishment?
That's the point in some respects. If we give you, so let's say you have an issue browsing a website, and the fix is you're trying to browse a website that's been blocked because it breaks a policy or whatever it is. You have to fill the form in to tell us why you want to go watch YouTube, for argument's sake. If you do that and you get the email saying it's been approved, but then you still can't access YouTube, then you say, I want to speak to a human. Then you speak to the human, and the human would be a level 3 or an engineer who would sit with you on a shared screen, and they would show you all the stuff that they have. Because one of the things we did was be very transparent to what we could see. And it's okay, I can see your problem here is we haven't actually, as much as we've approved it, it actually hasn't been run on the proxy that you're going through to allow you permission. Let me just fix that right now and I'll fix it. Then you should have access. So you get that experience. So the whole point was to say, you'll get the best service if we could just make sure that our first entry points are quick and easy. Because most people, we found it with tickets specifically, that often a user would create a ticket 7 or 8 days after the actual issue. And by that point, there's no data available that's really useful. Because and why don't they create the ticket? Because they're busy. They're trying to get their report out. They're trying to do something urgent, and this thing keeps crashing. But they'll nurse it through to that point of getting the thing out, and then a week later they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I need to raise a ticket for that." because now they've relaxed a little bit about it. There's not such a pressing issue. Whereas the biggest resistance to most users is, I've got to get this thing out. I really don't want to spend an hour with a support person asking me a whole bunch of questions while I'm trying to get this thing out that I've got to get out in an hour's time.
Yeah, I get it. Sure. I understand. Makes sense. Yeah, no, yeah, I think the question is really on how do you, I think it's all, how do you minimize, because how do you minimize the amount of things people have to deal with?
Yes.
And
Reduce friction. Yeah.
when you have to deal with an issue or a demand or a change or something you feel is not appropriate, at the end is how fast it gets fixed, explained, or addressed. And also, I guess, what do you do after that to look back and say, okay, what did we learn from that thing? Because that's we miss sometimes. What did we learn from that we can make sure doesn't happen again this way, not only for that particular person, but for others? And can we be proactive with others so that they don't even go through that experience at all?
Yes. Yes.
And that's very important to do, and either not done or difficult to do because maybe you don't have because things are not, you cannot say, okay, everybody has this application is a candidate. Not necessarily. It's a contextual thing. So when you have this plus this minus that at this moment, that's the situation. So who is likely to live it in the next week? And maybe we need to tell them proactively to read this or get this little training or I don't know, change the version of the application they use. That I think that's again where you have the big gains, because when you fix if in a big organization, when you fix an individual problem one time, you please one person, but you don't change the game. But when you change the game is when you can circle back and say, gosh, we have 5,000 people who could live this throughout the next 2 months. And we found a way that it will not happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I don't think we're there yet with that.
No, it's a very difficult thing to do, but it does help that perception management. One of the things we did back in the beginning was we would proactively monitor the key services, emails, Skype for Business, wherever it was. And if any of those things went down in an area, proactively notify to say, we are aware of this issue. Don't log a ticket. We're already solving it. And just that ability to raise that we knew about it, change perception that it was actually on top of things, as opposed to someone having to send an urgent email and all of a sudden in those days exchange has gone down.
Last thing is when you start to be so good in looping proactivity backwards from one individual case, imagine you can avoid this next wave that hits more people and more and more. There was one customer telling me one day, wow, with your tool, we can proactively avoid certain things to happen again and again, like recurrent problems and things like that. But now people don't experience it, but they don't know we did anything for that. And they start to think we are useless, because it's like a firefighter. When you see them extinguishing your house, you say, okay, thank you for coming. But if you have proactive detectors, that as soon as there is a little fume or a little scratches, things get extinguished with a drop of water. You don't even see it. You start to think, all this money we put on this firefighting department, why should I pay for it?
You saw that, I don't know if you saw it in California, they put in some legislation. So basically all the insurance companies stopped selling fire insurance. And then they had all these big fires. But because they basically you said the insurance was too expensive, and no one took out insurance for fire hazard. And now they can't rebuild all these houses because there's no insurance on them.
Yeah. Well,
so you can create that.
So that's the risk also. So we also need to even if things happen behind the scene, because if you're better trained at handling your gas at house, because maybe when it came or fire or whatever, electricity, you learn a lot of things. So you avoid a lot of incidents beforehand because of knowledge or tools or both usually. But But this is an investment, and it has to be taken into account, because exactly like you said, the risk is, oh, no more IT incidents because some magic happens. But in fact, we have team behind running tools and whatever, making things very proactive, very preemptive even. And we feel they are just waiting for disaster to happen. But in fact, they move their work from reactive to proactive. And it has to be known, because if we don't know, we would tend to decrease their budgets, their resources, and everything.
It's one of the reasons why we always track the tickets we avoided, because if they're not appearing as normal tickets, people think you're not doing anything. And in those days, we were paying $10 a ticket. Now it's probably about 55. I think that's what Forrester says they're worth. But I also look at it from one of the things with obviously having the non-persistent BI environment is that build would obviously be improved on a regular cycle. We had a lot of fixes that were running, those fixes that were running into the build to reduce the fixes running. So you'd see it running on disk space as a fix being run a lot. Then you'd fix the build. And then running on disk space wasn't run as much. So people would say, oh, we fixed the problem. Well, we've engineered a better solution, but you're not going to turn that fix off in case you still need it in the future, but you won't see it running 800 times. It might run 200 times because there will still be reasons to have that kind of stuff there. So there's a lot of things you can do, checks and balances and stuff, but a lot of it's marketing, internal marketing to some extent.
Exactly.
What you're still doing.
Exactly.
That's all we've gone way over, which is great.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else you want to cover, or do you want to?
No, I think it was long enough, but sharing thoughts, historical and also future ideas. It was a pleasure to do that with you.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for this, and long life to employee experience.
Yes. May it get better and better.
Yeah.
Super. Cool. Thanks, Vincent. All the best. We'll chat soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Dave. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it with your friends and colleagues. Help us grow our reach. Please also check out our website, www.value.work, and our product that's on there. It's something we worked really hard on. We hope that it benefits you.